Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 8th of August 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, and joining me in the studio is Ian Crane. Hello, Ian.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for the invitation to join you today.
Well, a great pleasure. And of course, the headlines over the weekend focusing on fracking, and we're going to be hearing a little bit about that in just a moment. But before we get there, weather, well, mixed over the weekend. I think a lot of people enjoyed some sunshine on Saturday. Then it went a bit wobbly, but not too bad here in Plymouth today. Well, speaking of wobbliness, we'll focus on UKIP because it appears to be quite clear that there's enough trouble now in UKIP to totally destabilise the party. Which of course is ideal for taking all of the heat off Brexit. Let's have a look at this headline here. Obviously featuring Nigel Farage, a man who is never seen in an image in the media unless, of course, it's an unpleasant image. So I'm just going to stick up for Mr. Farage on that one. But look at the title, UKIP's conspiracy theorists must stop dividing the party. And just one statement for the article. It says, in the last week, some in the conspiracy theorist wing of the party began falsely playing on that feeling to try and abolish the party's NEC, since it took the unavoidable decision to exclude Stephen Wolfe from the list of leadership candidates. What's remarkable is when you get down to the bottom, we find that the Telegraph article itself has been written by John Bickley, a UKIP parliamentary candidate who nearly took Haywood and Middleton from Labour in 2014. He's a member of the party's NEC and its treasurer, but he's writing in a personal capacity. A major article, Ian, where you run through it, and this man is simply pushing out all the dirt on UKIP. What do you make of it?
Well, I think obviously there's going to be moves to try to effectively destroy UKIP in the coming 2 or 3 years. And of course, if Brexit isn't pursued, God forbid, but if it isn't pursued, then of course UKIP will have a phenomenal surge in the run-up to the next election. I mean, quite possibly in the next council elections next year, but certainly in the next parliamentary elections, whenever they may be.
Well, of course, it's been indicated that maybe those elections are not going to be till 2020. Theresa May wants to get her feet under the table, fixed parliamentary period now. So destabilise UKIP and totally strip the power away from those 4 million UKIP voters. That to me seems to be the plan.
Well, absolutely. And of course, I think we're going to talk about it as well, but the redrawing of boundaries to further marginalise the Labour Party so that the Tories not only have a majority at the next election, but all but guarantee themselves a massive majority, of course, in association with Peter Lillian, the IDOC's system of administering postal votes.
Indeed. Well, if that's UKIP struggling with conspiracy theories, here is David Cameron. And let's not forget about this man, because is it as simple as the fact that a bit of cronyism over the honours list has caused a bit of trouble? Well, remarkably, and this is reported Russia Today, we've got a quote from the former spin doctor, Steve Hilton. He says, the corruption comes when the honours system starts to clash with democratic principles. The most obvious way this happens is when people who are not elected make the laws which we live under. That's a pretty interesting statement.
Well, it is indeed. And Stephen Hilton should know, because he was part of the inner sanctum that, of course, was effectively manipulating. But this is what's really interesting about this, Brian, is that, of course, with Brexit, the UK politicians no longer have the opportunity or the excuse to blame Brussels. So ultimately, they are accountable. The buck stops with them. Stops
with them. We'll pause at that point. First time in quite a long time. But OK, let's come on through then. We've got this one, which is the Daily Mail. And here we are. We've got Tories are on track for a huge 90-seat majority if Theresa May waits for the boundary changes before calling the general election. And this is the article saying that basically she doesn't want an election before 2020. So this, to my mind, is all about instability. They're going to make sure that the trouble is stirred, the pot is stirred with the Labour Party, so that Corbyn is undermined, Labour doesn't get any traction. And then Theresa May is going to delay everything to the end of that 5-year period. More instability with the boundary changes, which are going to be favourable to the Tories. I sense that this is the Tory dictatorship being fully put into position.
Well, once again, I mean, this is an indication of why it's so crucial that people start to engage in the process, much more so than they've done for probably the last 30, 40 years. Because if they don't, then the writing is very much on the wall. And as you say, I mean, Theresa May, she's not elected. She's not even elected by her own party membership. So she cruised into the role of PM. So she is, by all intents and purposes, effectively the dictator. Yeah. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this dictatorial role unfold as she starts to perceive that she's effectively wiping out the opposition through the UKIP conspiracy theories, also the boundary changes.
Yeah. And the other thing which we mustn't forget, of course, is that whereas we could say David Cameron was the total puppet on the string, did he have a brain? I'm not convinced he did. He followed the script. This is the lady, Theresa May's the lady that has put the whole of this massive state spying system in place. She's the one who's driven MAPA. She's the one pumping in the armed police. And
her husband, of course, is a prime mover within G4S. And, more and more of the policing and the surveillance is being privatised and outsourced to G4S, her husband. So, between the two of them, they pretty much have an iron grip.
Iron grip, absolutely. So we're going to say this is the lady to watch because compared to David Cameron, very, very dangerous. But the media trying to paint her as Middle England lady, dresses properly. She's the one we can trust. Meanwhile, Corbyn is undermined. But if we can just, Theo, pop that slide back on screen. I thought we'd just say that Theresa is looking a little bit tired in this picture.
Well, I think she's going to look increasingly tired and age very quickly once she starts to realise that things aren't exactly going her way. And I think, we have to make the observation that, the courts have again ruled that not only can Corbyn be on the ballot paper, but also all of the people who have registered as members of the Labour Party over the last few weeks will get an opportunity to ballot. And this, whilst I'm not suggesting for a moment that Jeremy Corbyn is the panacea here, but what he is doing, he is becoming a catalyst for people actually engaging once again in the political arena. And this is something we haven't seen in a long time. And the Labour Party membership actually stands at a figure now that was higher than when Blair was at the peak of his popularity in the mid-90s.
Yep. So going to be fascinating to watch, and one of the measures we've got that perhaps Corbyn has got something to offer is the fact he is being so viciously attacked. If he was no threat to the system, why cause the trouble? So maybe there's some of that. But of course it's Theresa May who is actually now courting for votes apparently by, it says here, trying to bribe people. That's a criminal offence, isn't it? But or maybe it isn't if you're a politician. So what's the story, Ian, on this? We're trying to bribe the public to accept fracking.
Well, this has got an interesting take about it because on the face of it, it seems to be, as you rightly say, that Theresa May is looking to bribe communities, and we'll talk about this in a second. But she's also doing the anti-fracking community a massive favour because she is bringing the topic to the forefront of debate. Now, admittedly, it's the quiet period. People are on holiday, so she's hoping that it doesn't get too much traction. But the reality is this is an issue that the British government would really like to just disappear and for them to be able to pursue it without the level of public opposition that is manifesting. Now, the anti-fracking community is the fastest growing social movement that this country has ever seen since the poll tax debacle of the 1980s. So here at the weekend, Theresa May announced that.
Do you want that one on screen? Sorry to interject there.
No, we'll come back to that in a second.
Okay, right.
That she's going to be looking at effectively bribing the households in an area. Now, if we bring that slide back again here, the area that is under direct threat right now, at number one there, is Kirby Misperton, which is a small village in North Yorkshire. It's actually also the home of Yorkshire's largest revenue-generating tourist attraction, Flamingo Land. And in fact, the well site at Kirby Misperton, which is currently the only well site to actually be approved for fracking in the UK. And the well site sits about a mile from the car park of Flamingo Land. And the entire village of Kirby Misperton sits between the well site and Flamingo Land. And in this this is from the Mail on Sunday, I think, this graphic. And what the Mail on Sunday have done is simply taken the 10 million and I divided it by the number of houses, which is about 154 households in Kirby Misperton, and said that each household could reap the benefit of up to £64,000. Now, Third Energy have stated that they intend to be on this well site for at least 9 years. And I think somebody's calculated that this works out about 12.5 pence per day for each of the households. But this is going to not only divide communities, but it's going to absolutely divide families. And we'll talk about the reason for this in a second. But not too surprising to note, Brian, was that this morning, when the stock market opened, the stock of iGas jumped by 30-odd%. And what you see here is that the stock closed at 13.33 pence on Friday, which is some 92% below its peak of January 2014. And it jumped up to 18.78 pence, purely on the back of this announcement. So there's a few mug punters out there who think they can make a quick buck by jumping on this bandwagon. But not everybody is of the same opinion. If we bring up the next slide here, this is UCOG. UCOG. This is David Lenegas, or formerly David Lenegas's company. And this is the company that has the license to frack at Horse Hill, to exploit resources at Horse Hill. Of course, the company's claiming that they're not going to frack, but I think we know different. But the stock price there has only climbed by 2.3%, and this is because UCOG investors have been stung so many times with the likes of David Lenegas blagging about the Gatwick gusher that there's a little bit more caution here. But Theresa May has stated that these payments to the householders in the areas are going to come out of taxation that is accrued as a result of these companies drilling in this area.
Well, just before you explain that a bit more, why is she saying that she wants to give this money to householders? If fracking is such a beneficial activity for the country, why does Theresa May need to pay households?
Because she knows very well that an increasing number of people are doing the research for themselves, and they are realizing that this is not something that they want in their or anybody else's backyard. Right. So what she's basically doing is saying, look, regardless of the risk, we'll pay you for living in an area that we effectively know is a sacrifice zone.
Right. And your added point to this is by doing that, actually, she's focusing on the fact there is a problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, brilliant. With the only other issue, the only other subject where such bribery is on offer, and this isn't common knowledge yet, is nuclear waste. And Radioactive Waste Management have a mandate to offer £40 million to any community that agrees to be the location for a deep geological disposal facility. Right. So obviously everyone understands the risks of nuclear waste, but not apparently everyone understands the risks associated with unconventional gas exploitation, i.e. fracking. And so what she's hoping is that she can stave off the community opposition through bribery. And of course, I mean, this is going to divide communities. Yeah. It is going to divide families, but in reality, it's also going to show people for what they are. Do they have the best interests of humanity at heart, or are they purely, basically motivated by pure greed?
Well, there's a question. Okay, so what about these figures here that we've got? We've got key financials.
Well, this is actually Third Energy. This is the last reported figures in the public domain from Third Energy, the company that actually has permission to frack the well at Kirby Misperton. And what you can see here is that the net worth of the company is minus £46.8 million. And basically, they owe a significant chunk to their parent company, which is an offshore company, I think based in the Cayman Islands. And this is the way these companies are set up. If you look at the next slide, this is actually Rathlin Energy, who have the license in East Yorkshire, and their net worth is minus 25.1 million. Actually, I believe it's more than that now because these figures are over a year old. But once again, who do they owe it to? Rathlin Energy owe it to Sunderland Holdings, which is the parent company of Rathlin Energy, registered in Jersey. So what's going to happen is, assuming that these companies do actually manage to start producing, which I don't think is necessarily very likely, but let's assume that they do start producing, then it's going to be a long time before they start paying any tax. Because the way they've structured it is that they can write off a significant amount of production revenues against the money that they've borrowed from their own parent companies to get to the point where they're in production. So unless Theresa May comes up with some other formula, the reality is that households and communities are not going to receive any benefits related to taxation. And the situation gets even more complex when you get to INEOS, which is headed up by Jim Ratcliffe. Now, INEOS has the bulk of the licenses across the north of England, and INEOS have stated quite categorically that their intention is not to mine the gas to put it into the national grid. It's to mine it for the sole purpose of providing feedstock, i.e. a fuel source, for their own chemical manufacturing and refinery facilities. So once again, there's no taxation benefit derived from that. So how these communities are going to get this supposed £10,000 a household remains a mystery at the moment.
Well, when you mentioned, Ian, that it was significant, the money was coming into communities. The talk is that this money will come into a community to benefit people. If we go back to the foot and mouth crisis, when it came to the payments of compensation, what they did was that some farmers received compensation and some didn't. So you'd have farmers in the same locality, same sort of farming. Some would be paid the compensation and some weren't. And of course, what that did very quickly is divide that community against itself, because people got upset. They were jealous. He's been paid, I haven't been paid. And this was a brilliant way for the government to start to make sure that there was no cohesive reaction from the farming community. So to me, I think we're seeing a sort of fracking model of that coming into existence here.
Well, absolutely. And of course, it was David Cameron and George Osborne who proposed that the tax benefits would go to the community. And I'm not sure at the moment whether Theresa May is saying that this is instead of or in addition to. But now what she's saying is that these benefits will go directly to the households. I mean, even stating that the money will be paid directly into their bank accounts. But what are these families actually getting the money for? Well, they're basically getting the money for playing Russian roulette with their health. And this is what neither the industry nor the government really wants people to do. It does not want people to do their own research. And I mean, there's been over 500 academic reports produced in the last 3-4 years now, all of which actually identify the significant negative impacts, i.e. contamination of the water, the soil, the air, the negative health impacts on livestock, on pets and human health, and of course on arable farming. But I'm just going to flag up this report, because this is from Yale University in Connecticut. And this is from a couple of years ago. And this is a study that looked at the impact on lungs and respiratory impact on people who lived within a kilometre of a fracked gas well. Now, this is effectively the entire village of Kirby Misperton.
Okay, I'll just read a little bit off that screen. Just at the bottom, it says, little is known about the environmental and public health impact of certain natural gas extraction techniques, including hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. So that's quite a statement, isn't it? Little is known. But this has been rolled out. We haven't checked what the health risks are, but we're piling it out across the country. But little by little, what's coming to the surface now is that there are health risks. And you would say significant health risks.
Significant health risks. And I mean, the evidence is really irrefutable. I mean, the industry and the government basically practice cognitive dissonance. They work on the basis of, no, it doesn't serve us to acknowledge these reports, so we'll just ignore them. And we will simply claim that it couldn't happen here because we have gold standard regulations. Now, this next slide is actually just to show that the UK online media is often a lot better balanced than the printed media. And over the last few years, the Mail online, which is actually, I think, allegedly the most widely read online media outlet in the UK. But over the last few years, the Mail online, which is a completely different editorial team than the printed version, have run a number of articles highlighting the negative impacts of hydraulic fracturing. And this is from 2 years ago now. And this is from the Mail Online, where it says, living near a fracking site doubles the risk of developing lung and skin conditions. And you see the final point there. It says, experts claim there is little risk of health problems if fracking is conducted on a large scale in the UK as gold standard regulations are in place. This is what the British government trots out and the industry trots out on an alarming basis. In reality, it is totally untrue. In reality, there are zero regulations in place in the UK that are specific to the unconventional gas industry. It's certainly the case that in the offshore oil and gas industry, the regulations are, I won't say necessarily gold standard, but they are very, very tight. And that primarily is due to the Piper Alpha disaster of 1988. And since then, obviously, the regulations have certainly been tightened up. But onshore, we apply the same rules and regulations, but there is nothing that is specific to unconventional gas exploitation, which is a totally different process. It subjects the wells to enormous pressures. And consequently, the regulations that need to be in place, well, in my opinion, there are no regulations that could be put in place to actually make this industry safe, period.
And also in that article, we've got that famous phrase, experts. Experts say. It's always experts. We're going to be mentioning in a different subject some experts in a minute. So this particular one,
this is
the real cost of fracking.
This is actually a book that has been published by, it's a husband and wife team. Michelle Bamberger is a vet, and Professor Robert Oswald they did a study a few years ago now, looking at the impact of unconventional gas, i.e. fracking, on agriculture, both in terms of arable agriculture and in terms of livestock. And obviously, an academic report doesn't get too widely read, so they actually turned it into a more readable book. This is available on Amazon. It was actually released almost exactly a year ago, I think, on the 1st of September last year. And the title of the book is The Real Cost of Fracking, How America's Shale Gas Boom is Threatening Our Families, Pets and Food. And once again, I mean, this is a book that the British government and the unconventional gas industry does not want people to read, any more than they want people to be watching Fracking Nightmare. And after 90-odd episodes, we took a bit of a pause. But this is episode 83, where I interviewed Helen Bender. That's Helen on the left of the screen there. And next to her is a picture of her father, George Bender, who last October committed suicide after 10 years of dealing with the Queensland government and the unconventional gas industry after they effectively destroyed his farm. Now, he had a double whammy because he was affected not just by unconventional gas exploitation through drilling, but also a disastrous experiment, a 13-year experiment in underground coal gasification that effectively toxified an area of some 230 odd square kilometres of southern Queensland, where basically the coal seams were set alight and they're out of control. And Link Energy did a runner effectively because they had no possible way of getting this disaster under control.
So the deliberate lighting fires, setting coal seams on fire, and then you can't control it, so you just pull out and run away.
Well, that's what Link Energy did in Australia. And of course, we have underground coal gasification licenses that have been awarded in this country to two companies, Five Quarters and Clough. Although in a recent communication, Clough stated that this was no longer part of their core business strategy. But, if we think fracking is bad, then underground coal gasification is fracking's ugly sister on acid.
Okay, on acid. Theo, if we can just pop that one back up, just to stress the point here. So we've got this gentleman who tragically commits suicide as a result of the reality of this. And then we can contrast it with these happy people, because apparently Third Energy in Yorkshire was presenting a cheque there in this one.
Well, this is how the companies try to bribe local communities, and all the companies, Quadrilla, iGas, Third Energy in this particular case, offer community funding. And here you see them handing over a cheque to a local community group, which is going to be used to provide play facilities. In the Blackpool area, Quadrilla are supporting local football teams and local colleges. And in fact, INEOS are sponsoring kids' sports days.
Yeah.
So they're trying to effectively finagle their way into the community and create a situation where the community, even though it knows there's a risk, is effectively bribed into acquiescence.
Okay, and this one I always like because this is the little castle of resistance. But what is the significance of this?
Well, this is Crawberry Castle. This is the castle that was built at Crawberry Hill, and I think I may even recognise the individual standing at the top there. Of course, this proved to be a potentially expensive castle on my part, because this was the event that effectively triggered Rathlin Energy's quest to drive me into bankruptcy.
Right.
But, really that's a small price to pay, because Crawberry Hill is actually the only location in the UK that had permission to frack a well. But the company, Rathlin Energy, has withdrawn from that well site and has returned the site to former agricultural glory. But the key point I want to make here, Brian, is that Rathlin Energy didn't just move away because we built the castle. Effectively, the castle was ultimately removed, the camp was evicted, but then it was the local community that stepped up to the plate.
Right.
And primarily it was probably no more than 2-3 dozen absolutely committed people, and a lot of them were retirees, so they had the time. And every time they heard that a vehicle went onto the well site, a group of them would go up there and blockade it. And eventually Rathlin Energy realised that there was no possibility of them achieving their much vaunted social licence, and that they were never going to get a free run at operating on this well site, because the local community had showed its determination to shut them down.
This is a very positive thing, isn't it, of what people power properly applied can do. So just good people getting out and making the effort to protest, no violence, no trouble.
Absolutely.
Just done in a reasonable way.
And sharing the information. And this is, again, one of my contributions. This is the documentary that I produced following my visit to Queensland in 2014. And I released the documentary about 16 months ago now. And it's been on YouTube for 15 months. And as of yesterday, coincidentally, the numbers seem to be manipulated downwards and rounded down to the nearest 1,000. So as of yesterday, with the government announcement, they were rounded down to 35,000. As you can see, as of this morning, it was up to 35,199. And I think the government and the industry are working with YouTube here to monitor the increased interest as a result of Theresa May's announcement yesterday. So the key element is that there's a lot of information available from multiple sources. I mean, one of the most significant sources is the list of the harmed, which is a document that has, I think it's over 17,500 cases, reported cases of people who have experienced negative impact as a result of this industry. And, you know, I will say this many, many times. I always encourage people to do their own research. They shouldn't take anything we or the industry or the government says at face value. They should do their own research and then come to their own determination as to whether this is something that they want in their or anybody else's backyard. And when they say no, they absolutely have to mean no, so that we see further events like Rathlin Energy just pulling out of a well site because they know very well that the local community are just not going to tolerate their presence. Okay, just question for you. What is your personal agenda now on fracking? Where do you want to take it? And campaigning? Where are you going? Well, like I said, I think Theresa May has done us a tremendous favour. I mean, the anti-fracking community will no doubt benefit enormously as a result of yesterday's announcement. And I think the key point is, I mean, this isn't about any individual, because no one individual, no one group has the capacity to, shut this industry down or get the government or the unconventional gas industry to walk away. This is absolutely down to local community groups, and there are now close on 1,000 groups around the country, all working to raise awareness, to encourage people within the communities to understand what the impact will be if the trucks roll into town. And eventually it's going to come down, just like in East Yorkshire, to whether or not the people are prepared to let the trucks roll into the well site or not. Okay, right, brilliant. So we are seeing there that people power can achieve things. Absolutely. Right, now you've mentioned interference and social media. We're going to jump topics here because we're going to come over to the terror threat, but we're going to find some interesting little links through. So this was a Russia Today article. It said ISIS was using the Telegram application to plot attacks on US bases in the Middle East. And where's this information come from? Well, it says Israeli hackers. Well, what are they talking about? Well, let's have a look at what's being said. Islamic State, formerly ISIS or ISIL, depending if you get confused over who they might be, has issued a call to target air bases used by the US in the Middle East. An Israeli cyber intelligence company has warned after it allegedly hacked into the terror group's Telegram communication system. And they're saying, this is INT Sites, the Israeli team. It says that IS has listed extremely specific targets with a call to attack them. And while a number of airfields used by the US Air Force were listed, priority targets were singled out in Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. And this was all pumped out by the company's Vice President of Intelligence, Alan Avatz. So we thought we'd take a little look at this company to see who is setting the intelligence picture for UK. Well, do have a look at this yourself, as Ian says. So we'll make it simple because we've got this gentleman here. He is ex-cyber security with Israeli Defense Forces. We've got this gentleman here. He was part of an elite intelligence unit for Israeli Defense Forces. You're feeling comfortable, Ian? Absolutely not. All above board. These are the people we should trust. We've got, their own words, a computer geek, but he was part of the elite intelligence unit with the Israeli Defense Forces. And then we've just got an IT leader down here. So why are we so interested? Well, this is the company. They're an intelligence-driven security provider established to meet the growing need for rapid, accurate cyber intelligence and incident mitigation. So apparently we should trust them. But note down at the bottom, it says Insights is backed by Gillot Capital Partners, one of the leading cyber-focused venture capital companies in the world.
At this point, I wasn't feeling too comfortable, but we'll carry on through. So here they are, Glillot Capital Partners. And it's always good to have a look at the people. Quite surprising, because we've got this gentleman here, Mr. Burrell. He's a chief data officer with PayPal. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? It's a very cozy little relationship. We've got this gentleman down at the bottom, Mammon, and he's with Yahoo. And just to make sure that we've got some weight in there, we've got a former retired FBI deputy director. So, according to this, we should all be taking the word of an Israeli company full of Israeli intelligence men about what is happening with this terrorist group, sometimes called Al-Qaeda, sometimes Al-Nusra, sometimes IS, ISIL, Daesh. Seems to have disappeared. Can we follow that through? Well, let's have a look at it in simplistic terms. We've got the reports that massive terrorist attacks are all being planned. Here's insights, and we'll just add in the backers, financial men, which brings us into PayPal, Yahoo, and the FBI. And then here's the main man who made the statement. And what have we got to say? He went on to state that the Normandy church, where a priest was killed by ISIS soldiers last week, was also on a target list published several months ago. Apparently nobody spoke out about that, Ian, but the Israelis knew several months ago, apparently. And someone recently decided to answer the call and attacked that very church. So this is the crass statement. This proves beyond doubt that there is a direct link between cyber activity and actual terrorist attacks, to which we say, where is the evidence for that claim? So this is almost cartoon stuff, in my opinion, Ian.
Well, anytime the Israeli intelligence services are involved in anything, or former intelligence personnel are involved in setting up surveillance companies, we should be very, very concerned, because their track record is horrendous. In fact, if people look at the resume of the Israeli or former Israeli intelligence personnel's security companies, then one has to wonder why it is that they keep employing them. Because, we look at 9/11 and the fact that it was Israeli security companies that were responsible for all the surveillance at the airports
and
concerned.
They didn't know. They just didn't know. They couldn't get it right.
And same with Madrid, with the London bombings, and Fukushima, and so on and so forth. The list continues. And as we've discussed on previous episodes of Humanity versus Insanity, there is an increasing amount of evidence that ISIS is effectively the Israeli secret intelligence service. And we know that ISIS is being funded and armed by US, Saudi, and Israeli arms companies. I mean, Saudi are funneling the American and British arms and Israeli arms into the moderate rebels, which is, of course, a term that has crept into the vocabulary to describe the good guys,
Okay, well, we're going to stick with the theme, but let's jump to Hillary Clinton now. And this report from the Mail is saying that basically Clinton's private server held emails about a nuclear spy executed in Iran. Aides discussed the scientist's friend and his decision to return home after defecting to the US for $5 million. So this is a picture of the gentleman. He's definitely dead. And the comment was, in interviews, Amiri has claimed he was drugged, put on a plane, and then kept under psychological pressure at an undisclosed location in the US. And there he was asked to hand over classified documents. So what do you think then?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's way more to this than obviously is being reported. I mean, the fact that Hillary Clinton has not had to face any real in-depth investigation over the use of a private server is truly staggering, because obviously that private server was wide open to hacking.
Ian, if she had been anybody within the US military and had that type of information on their home computer, they would be sitting in a prison cell now for a considerable period of time, but not Hillary Clinton.
Not Hillary Clinton. I mean, she is obviously one of the untouchables. And it's not beyond the realms of probability that information regarding this Iranian scientist was being freely exchanged from her private computer. And I certainly wouldn't put it past the Israeli security services to deliberately feed information into the Iranian security services so that they could effectively eliminate a person that may well be perceived as a potential threat to them. I mean, the world of subterfuge is absolutely ridden with socio-psychopaths. And how these people can sleep at night. Well, the only way they can sleep at night, of course, is they are soulless. They have no soul. They're not human as we would define humanity.
Indeed. So we're going to stick with this. You'll see where it ends up. It's quite remarkable. Here is the story again. So just the same headline. But in this article, this lady pops up. And apparently everybody is very concerned because Mrs. Zaghari Ratcliffe is in Iran and she's in prison. And Britain's Foreign Office, we're deeply concerned about this lady. She hasn't had a proper trial. So naturally, the Foreign Office is there to help, not with the Doherty families in Scotland, but this lady in Iran. And this is what caught my attention, because it says that Zaghari Ratcliffe, 37, works for the Thomson Reuters Foundation, a London-based charity that is independent of Thomson Reuters and operates independently of Reuters News. Let's just highlight that. And I thought it absolutely fascinating that there was this need to keep pushing independent, Reuters independent. So what is the sort of background to Reuters intelligence? Well, again, go and have a look at this for yourself. Here's the site. And let's have a look at some of their executive team. Now, we've got some faces, but we've also got a question mark. Nothing to do with UK column. That's on the website itself. But who is the missing man? Well, by an amazing coincidence, it's Mr. Glilot himself. This is the former FBI director, who just happens to be a big man in Thomson Reuters Special Services. So we've got a man mixing with Reuters, with the FBI, and with Israeli specialist crypto security firms. And we'll just add that in. So we've got this gentleman connected into an organisation which is apparently forecasting when the next terrorist attacks are coming.
Well, the reality, Brian, is that today there is really no delineation between news organisations, intelligence services, government. It's all about technocracy. It's all about the total control. I mean, this is the wet dream of Marion King Hubbard and Howard Scott when they wrote Technocracy Inc. in 1932. And as far as I'm concerned, when George Orwell, Eric Blair, wrote 1984, it wasn't a novel. He had read Technocracy Inc. and he was trying to alert future generations to what was planned. Back then, of course, they didn't have the surveillance technology, which they do now. So now they have the technology, they can put this wet dream into practice. And all these organizations are basically either wittingly or unwittingly sharing data.
Okay. Well, we're just going to remind people to sort of end on this subject that if we've got Thomson Reuters people connected into these specialist Israeli companies, let's remember what's been openly declared in the British press. So this is the mix as it was of Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee into GCHQ, MI5, MI6. Malcolm Rifkin, well, he was sacked as chairman because he'd done a little bit of sort of off the record dealing with Chinese companies, I think. So a trustworthy man to be running British intelligence. And then we've got David Cameron. And of course, what did David Cameron say publicly? That his support for Israel was unbreakable. So the British Prime Minister simply declaring, well, Brits, you come second because my primary loyalty is to Israel.
And let's not forget that, of course, he succeeded William Hague, who became the poster boy for the Friends of Israel and for the attacks on Assad in Syria. after having been shown some somewhat compromising photographs. Now, we know that as fact because that came out in the public domain during the Leveson inquiry, when a journalist, a mainstream journalist, actually revealed that although these photographs had been acquired by Rupert Murdoch and the Sun for the sum of £5 or £25,000, but those photographs were never published. But they were shown to William Hague, and after that moment, he actually effectively
didn't want to play.
Yeah, well, he was on track from that point forward.
Right, and we'll end on this one, on this subject, which of course this is Francis Maude, without any consultation in Parliament, simply announced that British intelligence services were to be working in partnership not only with Israeli intelligence services, but there was a link up between universities and high-tech firms. So my question is, have we now got the stage where the high-tech firms are simply fabricating the terrorist threat in order to create the fear factor in UK?
And justify further funding to be able to further develop their technology. Yeah. And also to obviously attract government contracts, which are all done on a cost-plus basis. So it's a guaranteed income for life.
Guaranteed income for life. Meanwhile, across the world, of course, millions of people are dying on the back of this corporate warmongering elite. Well, I'm just going to end with a taster, and that is that tomorrow we'll be having another look at what's been happening with the child abuse inquiry and the resignation of Ms. Goddard. But here's a couple of headlines which I think show us where things are going to go. We've got the president of the Police Superintendents Association, Gavin Thomas, and he said there are so many paedophiles we can't jail them all, and we've got to have a softer approach at the lower level of crime. So we're being told there's no VIP paedophiles, but there are a lot of paedophiles. NSPCC have said there's 50,000 child abuse victims. But of course, nobody's doing anything naughty with children in Westminster. And then I'm going to thank the person who sent us this email. And they said that they noticed that the BBC were running the Goddard resignation scandal as the fourth news item after the Olympics. So this was being pushed well to the background. We don't want to talk about Goddard. And then what we could start to see is massive attacks coming in on the child abuse inquiry, including journalists who are saying, really, this is all nonsense and we should close it all down because there are no child abuse victims.
Well, this is a classic case of just trying to keep the can, kicking the can down the road until everyone gets bored with it and it just goes away. I mean, I think it would be very interesting. It's not going to happen, of course, but if Dame Goddard actually decided to protect her own reputation and reveal exactly what has transpired in the time that she has been on the payroll. I say it's unlikely going to happen, but I think the prospect of her actually having walked away voluntarily is slim to none. I mean, this was a gravy train for her. But now we've got to start the whole process again and call it a hunch, but whoever it is that they appoint is either going to be an extremely safe pair of hands or somebody who in a year or 2 years' time, they can once again force out and kick the can further down the road again.
And we'll just leave our viewers and listeners with the thought that, of course, Jimmy Savile took a visit to Israel many years ago where he briefed the Knesset and said that they weren't being Jewish enough. That was publicly reported, so you can check up on that yourselves. But I wonder why he held enough clout to be invited in to talk to senior levels of the Israeli government.
Well, I think that, for years, the establishment basically gave the British public the finger. The programme, Jim Will Fix It, was clearly an inside joke.
Yeah. Okay, Ian, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you, Brian.
There you have it. Don't believe us. Do your own research and find out for yourselves what's happening, whether it's fracking the children or it's basically the criminal activity of the British government and the fear factor over world terrorism. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye now.